After 4-year-old Bobby Dunbar went missing near a lake in Louisiana back in 1912, it was thought that he had either drowned or was eaten by alligators. However, after an 8-month-long investigation, police claimed to have found the missing child alive and well in Mississippi. The authorities immediately took the child to the Dunbar family to confirm that this was indeed their son. And this is where the extremely strange and weird and twisted story begins. Hello, beautiful people. Welcome back to your fix for the strangest and weirdest, creepiest true crime stories out there. The bar is always open, and there's always something good cooking here. So order something up to eat, pick your poison, make sure to always leave a tip, and join that SBG family. And remember, you can always custom order something in the comments section. Alright, let's go, guys. It was on August 23rd, 1912, when Percy and Leslie Dunbar were on a fishing trip at Swayze Lake, Louisiana, with their two young boys, Alonzo and Bobby, the latter of whom had blonde hair, blue eyes, was just 4 years old. Just a day into the trip, little Bobby vanished. He was last seen near that lake. A small trail of footprints leading to that lake led many to kind of guess that he had either drowned or maybe was eaten by an alligator, because alligators were known to populate this area. A search of the lake offered up no human remains, and hunters hounded these alligators for several weeks to come. They were slicing them open, seeing if they could find the boy's remains, but nothing. They could not find this kid's remains. The Dunbars actually believed that their child was kidnapped and offered up a pretty large reward. It was basically the equivalent of about $160,000 by today's standards. And so despite all indications that the little boy had died at Swayze Lake, a nationwide hunt was instigated. 8 months later, some residents in Mississippi found a little boy that matched Bobby Dunbar's description perfectly, and they alerted authorities. He had been traveling in the company of a piano tuner, a man by the name of William Cantwell Walters. Cantwell was brought in and he was charged with kidnapping immediately. But of course, he claimed his innocence. He says, no, the boy was actually his brother's, and he was fathered with a woman named Julia Anderson. And his brother wanted nothing to do with that child, so this gentleman says he was raising this child and taking care of this child as his own. And the child, according to Cantwell, his name was actually Charles Bruce Anderson, known since birth as Bruce. So by this time, authorities were like, okay, this is a strange story. So they reached out to the people that he named in the story, and Julia Anderson corroborated his entire story and said, yes, that is my child. He's not lying. This is Bruce. This is my son. And she basically said if there's any resemblance between Bobby and Bruce, that's merely a coincidence. Like, this is my child. But again, in this wild and crazy story, one of the bizarre twists is she would state that, yes, Walters did kidnap this child, but he did not kidnap the child from the Dunbars. He kidnapped this child from me. She stated that, yes, I gave Bruce to Walters to watch for a few days, and he ran off with this child, and she had not seen him for a year. She says they were gone so long that when she did finally see her son, that she did not recognize him. He looked a little different to her. But she swore up and down that this is not little Bobby Dunbar, that this was Bruce. And in order to kind of gauge her truthfulness, the police asked her to do a lineup of children that looked similar to Bobby Dunbar, or Bruce in this matter, and she really just struggled to figure out which one was her child. She said his hairstyle changed so much, he just looked a little different because she hasn't seen him in so long. That's the reason why she struggled. So the whole thing was just weird. It was just fishy. It was just like, what the heck's going on here? And of course, so the Dunbars packed up, traveled to Mississippi to go find their missing child and see if this is actually their child that they found. Now, there's some conflicting stories about when the Dunbars initially met this child that they found in Mississippi. Some newspapers reported that upon their arrival, the child reached out and hugged the parents out of pure joy. Rival newspapers claimed that Leslie Dunbar kind of was in the same boat as Julia. She kind of didn't recognize the child at first, And the boy also seemed scared and did not want to approach the Dunbars as well. And he also didn't recognize his brother Alonzo. The boy just seemed scared, according to this rival newspaper. And furthermore, parents, they know their children, they know the markings on their children. So the parents knew that Bobby Dunbar, the real Bobby Dunbar, had like a scar in his foot. So they immediately checked, like, okay, is this the scar? And the scar was not there. Those markings were not there. They miraculously, magically disappeared somehow. And yet the Dunbars just seemed so desperate to get Bobby back, and they wanted to head back to Louisiana with their son, that they kind of, in their mind, they just said, you know what? The scar probably faded away. He's been gone for 8 months, so the scar probably just healed up and faded away naturally over time. And despite the uncertainty, and despite the protests of Julia Anderson and the residents of North Carolina who supported her claims that he was her son, the court sided with the Dunbars after the trial, and they were given legal guardianship over the child on April 25th, 1913. And Julia Anderson was poor and had a number of children out of wedlock. At that time, that was probably a huge deal. 1912, having children out of wedlock, they probably saw you as less than back in those days. And they probably still do to these days. Not a lot has changed, unfortunately. She was basically told, you need to move on or you're going to face legal consequences. And the system is not built for poor people. Let's be honest. And William Cantwell Walters, who always maintained that he had been given permission by Anderson to raise this child, was actually charged and given life in prison for kidnap. He was released within 2 years on a technicality. And as for the boy, he moved back to Louisiana and he lived out the rest of his life as Bobby Dunbar. And the boy grew up and eventually got married, and he had 3 children of his own, and he died in 1966. But in 2004, his granddaughter, Margaret Cutright, began investigating the matter through the DNA of her father, Bob Dunbar Jr., son of Bobby Dunbar. The results would turn the century-year-old case on its head, and the DNA profiling would prove that Bobby Dunbar had not been a Dunbar by blood. Therefore, he was basically kidnapped and raised by the wrong family. Julia Anderson had been vindicated. Cutright claims that when Bobby grew old enough to understand what had happened to him, he actually sought out the Anderson family and had several meetings with them in an attempt to get to know them. Cutright believes that the Dunbar family actually knew that the real Bobby Dunbar had drowned or was likely eaten by an alligator, but out of grief and by the power of their wealth, and they just couldn't accept it, so they took Bruce Anderson and raised them as Bobby Dunbar, or as Bobby 2, as Cutright refers to him. And of course, her investigations drew dire among some of the other Dunbar family members, because they struggled to kind of come to terms of their family's heritage and what members of their family had done. And Cutright's digging led to basically discover that Julia Anderson actually went on to become a nurse. She went on to have more children. And after meeting with these children, Cutright basically learned that her mother just never got over her child being stolen from her by the Dunbars, which is like, I couldn't even imagine someone stealing your kid legally and then just raising them with their name and just changing their name. And it's bizarre. The whole thing is just wild and crazy. It's bizarre. And again, it just kind of circles back to that whole, her being perceived as having lack of character, her financial status, her societal status, that she was just left powerless, and these Dunbars came in with their money and their status and were able to steal her child away. And in the end, Bobby Dunbar, who was actually really Bruce Anderson, was kidnapped multiple times in his life. First by William Cantwell Walters, and he made him travel around the country in a wagon, and then technically by the government, and finally by the Dunbars. And people speculate, why did this child not speak up, and how did it go this long? Basically, the Dunbars did not allow this child to be interviewed, and he was out of the public sight for many, many years. They just would not let anyone outside their family basically talked to him. Or maybe Bruce just said, hey, I got a good thing here, I got a rich family, so why not spoil it? But I don't think that's true. But as far as what happened to the real Bobby Dunbar, the little boy who just vanished one day, that's a riddle that remains unsolved. Who's to say that he actually went missing near the lake? Who's to say an alligator ate him? Who's to say his parents, through negligence or something more sinister, killed the little boy and covered it up? I mean, there's a similar story out there, and I can't remember. There's a documentary on it. It's called Imposter, I believe. But who knows? I mean, what do you guys think? Let me know in the comment section, what do you guys think happened to the real Bobby Dunbar? If you guys are new to my channel, make sure you guys leave a like, subscribe. I'm a small channel trying to grow here, so make sure you guys put those likes in, leave some comments for me, subscribe. It helps out with the algorithm so much. Thank you guys. Be good.